Hi, I'm Jo Karimnia. I'm an artist living in Memphis. I was born in Detroit, which is sort of like a big Memphis, which makes me very comfortable here. I've also lived in Texas and Minnesota. I've always been an artist. I remember in kindergarten, my kindergarten teacher making a big fuss with my mother over an owl painting that I did. And I think that sort of started me on my road. I bought lots of kits when I was a child and would draw like do this pastel drawing of a tree, or I have a drawing of a friend's poodle that I did that was really kind of a like going off the rails of the kit, which was really exciting for me. And I did a lot of art in high school, including things like doing animation and movies, and then I followed my first love to Texas and ended up at Stephen F. Austin State University in Nacogdoches, Texas, where I earned a bachelor's degree in drawing and painting. And life went on from there, and I've been in Memphis for about 20 years, and I have also embraced the arts culture here, and I'm an advocate for the arts, and I work for Crosstown Arts doing all kinds of fun projects. And being an artist is great. It's a lot of fun. I started working with little glass beads 4 or 5 years ago. I was doing a lot of traditional mosaic work, and I had this idea of using the beads as grout instead of using traditional grout. And so I did a piece where the seed beads were in between the pieces of tile. And then I said, what if I got rid of the tile and just used the beads? And so that's sort of how I started using seed beads in my practice. One of the things that I do a lot is to do small pictures. I like to buy like vintage postcards, and then I'll buy different sorts of beads and test them out. These are like much easier and quicker projects, and they're like how I learn about what the beads will do, like how they look when you place a pink bead, say, on top of a brown tree branch, like what happens. And I learn things like I like the translucent beads more than the solid beads, but I use a little bit of both. And I experiment with bugle beads, which are sort of the longer beads that are like a little tube, and I use those to make lines. And then sometimes I'll do some larger but still small pieces and do like a body of work. And these sort of started off as playing with the idea of objects in art. So maybe I would take a picture of a beautiful piece of clothing or a pattern in a vintage store, say on a like some old kitchenware, and print that out and fold it up and make it into an object, like with origami. So I would make cups or hearts or boats, and then take a picture of those and print that out and draw it, and then I would make that with beads, which are like little objects, right, onto like these small 6 by 6 inch panel boards, which are like objects in themselves. So it's a lot of layers of objects in the work, and the beads have sort of become like my personal superpower. I like the femininity of them. I like that they're a craft sort of thing to use, and they soak up the light and like swirl it around inside themselves and bounce it all around and absorb like all the color that they can, shoot it back out to the viewer for like extra intensity. So I feel like the beads really give both strength and beauty to the work. I started making work about people in costumes. My youngest likes to go to do cosplay at conventions, and I started taking photographs there, and I really became interested in how costumes affect people, how they can sort of make us anonymous and take us outside of ourselves. And that's sort of when the faces disappeared in my work. The emphasis was on the costume and the anonymity. And I did a series of 8 by 10 small pieces that were all about these costume ideas. And then I was awarded a grant from Arts Memphis, the Arts Accelerator grant, to do 10 36 by 48 pieces. And so that's how I financed this work. Each of these large pieces has between $200 and $300 worth of beads on it. So they're expensive to make and time consuming. This piece right here, it's from a photograph that was taken at a fair. And I actually invented a new technique of beading for this. I use acrylic medium as a glue. I know it's something that's archival, and it also comes in gloss and matte. And I like to play with those sorts of things depending on what kind of beads I'm using. And I buy in large quantities, and the beads come in these wonderful, like a skein of yarn sort of, but it's all beads. And they're really beautiful, and they're all on individual strings. And so the way that I did this one was to lay down some glue and then put like a whole string of beads out, lay it out, and then just pull the string out so that I was able to easily get these lines of beads. I didn't have to put each bead individually. And I also liked that it was very fabric-like when I made a mistake or when parts of the beads got bunched up. So I embraced that idea as well. And then this piece over here is an image that I took at a Day of the Dead festival. This is a Katrina from the back, and the thing that I really like about this piece is the juxtaposition between like the very fancy dress and the beautiful beads and the everyday in the background. The festival was at a place that used to be a mall, very sort of industrial. And then I really like the idea that she's dressed really fancy, but that around her waist is a gentleman's arm, and he's just wearing like a sweatshirt. So the contrast between these two things, the everyday and the extraordinary, and where those things meet, really interests me. I don't really consider myself a printmaker. This was not like a large part of my practice until about 4 years ago when I was invited by a local arts store that does like a lot of events. They were doing this thing where they were making giant woodcuts and printing them with a steamroller in the street. And they invited me to come and cut a 4 by 8 foot block of wood, and I said, I can't do that. And they said, yes, you can, and they talked me into it. And it was really hard work, but it was really fun, and I've done 3 of these so far. So this piece behind me was actually cut on a 4 by 8 foot piece of MDF, it's called, with carving tools, and then it's literally printed in the street. So you lay the big piece of wood down and you put a whole bunch of ink on it, and you put the fabric or whatever you're going to print on, and then you take a steamroller and you drive over it, and that's what gets the giant print. And so this led me to also explore like more traditional things, like smaller prints. And so I also learned how to use their small press, and I really like the idea of printing on vintage fabric. I feel like it gives another dimension to the work, and so I collect sheets and pillowcases and anything that I can find that has beautiful colors and that will inform the work. I also, when I do the giant prints, there are a whole bunch of artists that do this. And last year, another artist, Eric Clausen, did almost a life-size bear. And we realized that the bear head would fit on top of the lady body that I made. And so we made a collaborative piece and sewed them together and made She Bear together. When I was younger, I always wanted to travel. I remember being kind of jealous of kids in my class that would, go to Florida for their vacation or to go overseas. That seemed way beyond like anything that I can imagine. And I never really got to travel until I was in my 40s. I didn't have a passport until I was about 43, and my first trip was to Istanbul. And then I started doing the work with costumes, And I was able to travel to places like Germany and Bolivia, and I was really sensitive to like the idea of dressing up in native costumes and how this could help us learn about ourselves and learn about like our personal history and background. And costume is really a one window into different cultures. And so I began taking images of like German costumes. This happens to be a costume that was just in a window. It was a window display. But in Bolivia, I went to a big dance festival and just photographed costumes, fabulous costumes all day long. It happened to be all children. And like it was really evident what they were learning about their culture by participating in this incredible, beautiful event. One of the nice things about having an art show is that people talk to you about your work and ask you questions. And one thing I discovered recently was I was saying to people things like, well, I'm not really a beater, I'm not really a printmaker, I'm not really an embroiderer, but I take all of these things, and because I'm not restricted by the rules of, say, printmaking, I feel a big amount of freedom to do things any way I want, to use things any way I want. Beads are not a traditional element to use in a mosaic, but I went there, and it helps me. I don't mind, like on the embroidery pieces, if there are little puckers. I don't care about things like stitch count. And not that I don't appreciate these things, the beautiful things when I see them, but because I'm not burdened by that culture, it gives me permission to do anything I want with any medium I want. And apparently I embrace this.